and his sister was not collecting shells. The driver was checking his mirrors, and the passengers were not talking. The kids were not jumping on the tram watching. The actors were not rehearsing, and the director was not giving instructions. The airplane was not flying, and the passengers were not enjoying the view. The little boy was not playing with a ball, and his sister was not collecting shells. The parents were not discussing vacation plans, and the kids were not playing outside. The salesman was not presenting a product, and the customers were not listening. The scientist was not writing notes, and the assistant was watching TV or playing video games. Was she talking on the phone while her friend was reading a book? Were they dancing at the party while the DJ was playing music? Was the store while it was raining outside? Were you studying for your exam while your friends were having lunch? Was he working at his desk while his colleagues were having a meeting? Were the children playing in the yard while their parents were cooking dinner? Was she driving to work while listening to the radio? Were you talking to your friend while he was fixing the car? Was the dog barking while the cat was sleeping on the couch? Were the employees working on the project while the boss was giving instructions? Was he playing the guitar while his sister was singing? Were you cleaning the house while your children were playing outside? Were they studying together while their friends were playing sports? Was she eating lunch while her husband was preparing the salad? Were you waiting for the bus while watching people pass by? Was he helping his mom while she was cooking dinner? Were we shopping at the mall while the kids were playing at the playground? Was the teacher explaining the lesson while the students were writing notes? Were you reading the newspaper while your partner was drinking coffee? Were the birds singing while the wind was blowing gently? Was she practicing her speech while he was rehearsing the piano? Were we driving to the beach while the kids were singing in the back seat? Were they looking at the stars while the fire was burning brightly? Was he preparing his presentation while the team was discussing their project? Were you watching the movie while your friend was texting on their phone? Was she singing on stage while the audience was clapping? Were they playing chess while their friends were watching a movie? Was he taking a nap while his roommate was cleaning the kitchen? Were you writing your essay while your roommate was reading a book? Was she painting the wall while he was fixing the door? Were you doing your homework while your sister was listening to music? Was the baby crying while the mother was feeding him? Were we sitting on the beach while the sun was setting? Was he filling out the form while you were taking a phone call? Were you texting your friend while walking down the street? Was she running in the park while the dog was chasing after her? Were they cleaning the house while you were watching TV? Was he drawing a picture while his sister was reading a book? Were we working in the garden while the dog was digging a hole? Were they driving to the store while their children were playing at home? Was she trying to fix the car while he was giving her instructions? Were we sitting in the cafe while the rain was falling outside? Was he playing the piano while his family was listening to his music? Were you cleaning your room while your parents were cooking dinner? Was she baking cookies while her brother was watching TV? Were they studying for the test while we were having a discussion? Was the teacher lecturing while the students were taking notes? Were you playing the guitar while your friend was playing the drums? Was she writing an email while he was answering a phone call? Were we looking for our keys while our neighbor was walking by? Was she getting ready for the party while her friends were waiting for her? Were they exploring the forest while their parents were setting up camp? Was he working from home while his wife was making dinner? Were you listening to music while cleaning the kitchen? Was she typing on her laptop while the kids were playing outside? Were they playing cards while we were enjoying the view? Was he studying for his exam while his roommate was watching TV? Were you taking notes while listening to the lecture? Was she cooking dinner while watching her favorite TV show? Were they writing their reports while you were fixing the printer? Was he calling his friend while his sister was organizing the books? Were you sleeping while I was working on the project? Was the teacher discussing the homework while the students were talking? Were they painting the fence while their dog was running around the yard? Was she reading a novel while listening to soft music? Were you watching the game while your friends were cheering? Was he playing chess while his parents were making dinner? Were they chatting online while you were writing your email? Was she taking photos while her friends were posing for the picture? Were we enjoying the sunset while the birds were singing? Was he cleaning the car while you were washing the windows? Were you taking a walk while your friend was jogging? Was she playing video games while her brother was doing his homework? Were they visiting their grandparents while we were packing for the trip? Was he playing football while you were watching from the sidelines? Were we writing emails while the internet was not working? Was she speaking in French while her friend was translating for her? Were you singing in the shower while your brother was playing the guitar? Was he teaching a class while the students were taking notes? Were they walking down the street while we were sitting in the cafe? Was she writing a letter while her children were playing in the yard? Were we driving to the concert while the band was rehearsing? Was he studying in his room while the rest of the family was watching TV? Were they eating lunch while you were studying for your exam? Was she shopping at the mall while her friends were trying on clothes? Were they building the house while the workers were laying the foundation? Was he reading the book while his sister was knitting a scarf? Were we waiting for the train while looking at the schedule? Was she singing her favorite song, washing the dishes? Were they working on the project while the boss was giving instructions? Was he driving to the office while talking to his colleague? Were you working late while your family was celebrating? Was she walking the dog while listening to an audiobook? Were we talking while the concert was going on? Was he studying in the library while his friends were playing basketball? Were they taking a nap while you were cooking dinner? Was she baking a cake while her husband was cleaning the garage? Were you planning the weekend while your friend was making arrangements? Was he exploring the city while his friends were shopping for souvenirs? Past continuous tense, use 3. An interrupted action in the past, positive forms. He was jogging when it started to rain. He was exercising when his phone rang. She was riding her bicycle when she fell. He was sleeping when his alarm went off. I was petting my cat when it jumped away. I was eating dinner when the doorbell rang. I was driving home when I saw an accident. She was fixing her hair when the mirror fell. They were cycling when a dog chased them. I was shopping when I ran into an old friend. I was calling my friend when my battery died. I was making coffee when the kettle whistled. I was sewing a button when the needle broke. I was practicing guitar when my friend called. He was driving to work when he got a flat tire. I was walking home when I met an old friend. I was watching a movie when my phone rang. The baby was sleeping when the phone rang. I was reading a book when my sister called me. He was tidying his desk when his friend visited. He was fixing the car when his wife came home. They were eating dinner when their friend called. I was filling the form when the pen ran out of ink. They were laughing when the teacher walked in. They were playing soccer when it started to rain. He was drinking coffee when his boss called him. He was tying his shoelaces when his phone rang. She was taking a shower when the doorbell rang. They were jogging when they saw a shooting star. She was cooking dinner when the guests arrived. She was drawing a picture when her pencil broke. I was learning French when I met a native speaker. I was explaining the rules when my phone buzzed. I was ironing my clothes when the power went off. We were driving to work when we saw an accident. The dog was barking when we arrived at the house. She was polishing her nails when the bottle spilled. We were waiting for the bus when it started to snow. I was talking to my friend when my dad interrupted. She was waiting for a taxi when it suddenly arrived. She was watering the plants when it started raining. I was choosing a dress when my friend texted me. They were singing a song when the lights went out. I was watching the sunset when my phone buzzed. We were fixing the broken chair when Dad walked in. The baby was crying when his mother picked him up. The kids were playing outside when it started raining. We were arranging the chairs when the event started. She was looking for her keys when she found a letter. She was painting her room when she ran out of paint. He was cleaning his room when he found a lost photo. We were organizing the room when my mom came in. He was writing an email when the Wi-Fi disconnected. They were listening to music when the power went out. She was looking at photos when she found an old one. She was trying to sleep when her phone started ringing. We were decorating the house when a balloon popped. We were laughing at a joke when the teacher walked in. He was parking the car when he scratched the bumper. I was scrolling through my phone when I got a message. We were making dinner when the oven stopped working. They were running in the park when they saw a rainbow. She was folding laundry when she found a missing sock. They were studying for the test when the lights went out. I was texting my friend when the teacher called my name. We were enjoying the beach when it suddenly got cloudy. They were hiking in the mountains when it started raining. She was combing her hair when she found a gray strand. The baby was playing with toys when his mom called him. The dog was running in the park when it chased a squirrel. We were making a cake when we realized we had no eggs. She was organizing her closet when she found an old diary. She was knitting a sweater when her cat jumped on her lap. We were discussing the project when the manager came in. We were exploring the city when we discovered a hidden cafe. He was brushing his teeth when the water stopped running. The waiter was serving food when someone dropped a plate. She was writing in her diary when her mom entered the room. He was playing video games when his mother shouted at him. We were discussing our vacation plans when my phone rang. They were checking into the hotel when the fire alarm went off. They were dancing at the party when the DJ changed the song. He was mowing the lawn when the lawnmower stopped working. The teacher was explaining the lesson when the fire alarm rang. She was applying makeup when her friend knocked on the door. The children were laughing when their teacher entered the room. The children were eating ice cream when the dog stole their food. We were singing karaoke when the microphone stopped working. The team was practicing on the field when the coach blew the whistle. They were packing for a trip when they realized they forgot their tickets. The kids were jumping on the trampoline when their dad came outside. She was stretching before the race when she heard the announcement. Negative forms. He was not jogging when it started to rain. She was not riding her bicycle when she fell. He was not exercising when his phone rang. I was not petting my cat when it jumped away. I was not eating dinner when the doorbell rang. He was not sleeping when his alarm went off. I was not driving home when I saw an accident. I was not walking home when I met an old friend. I was not calling my friend when my battery died. I was not making coffee when the kettle whistled. I was not shopping when I ran into an old friend. I was not watching a movie when my phone rang. The baby was not sleeping when the phone rang. He was not tidying his desk when his friend visited. I was not reading a book when my sister called me. He was not fixing the car when his wife came home. I was not filling the form when the pen ran out of ink. They were not laughing when the teacher walked in. They were not eating dinner when their friend called. They were not playing soccer when it started to rain. She was not taking a shower when the doorbell rang. He was not drinking coffee when his boss called him. She was not cooking dinner when the guests arrived. I was not ironing my clothes when the power went off. I was not explaining the rules when my phone buzzed. We were not driving to work when we saw an accident. T was not choosing a dress when my friend texted me. I was not watching the sunset when my phone buzzed. She was not waiting for a taxi when it suddenly arrived. She was not watering the plants when it started raining. They were not singing a song when the lights went out. Was not talking to my friend when my dad interrupted. The dog was not barking when we arrived at the house. We were not waiting for the bus when it started to snow. She was not painting her room when she ran out of paint. She was not looking for her keys when she found a letter. The baby was not crying when his mother picked him up. We were not fixing the broken chair when Dad walked in. We were not arranging the chairs when the event started. We were not organizing the room when my mom came in. He was not trying to sleep when her phone started ringing. He was not writing an email when the Wi-Fi disconnected. He was not cleaning his room when he found a lost photo. She was not looking at photos when she found an old one. We were not having lunch when the waiter brought the bill. They were not listening to music when the power went out. They were not running in the park when they saw a rainbow. We were not laughing at a joke when the teacher walked in. She was not practicing the piano when the power went out. They were not studying for the test when the lights went out. They were not hiking in the mountains when it started raining. I was not texting my friend when the teacher called my name. She was not combing her hair when she found a gray strand. The baby was not playing with toys when his mom called him. The dog was not running in the park when it chased a squirrel. We were not making a cake when we realized we had no eggs. He was not brushing his teeth when the water stopped running. She was not knitting a sweater when her cat jumped on her lap. We were not discussing the project when the manager came in. The waiter was not serving food when someone dropped a plate. He was not playing video games when his mother shouted at him. She was not writing in her diary when her mom entered the room. We were not discussing our vacation plans when my phone rang. They were not checking into the hotel when the fire alarm went off. They were not dancing at the party when the DJ changed the song. The teacher was not explaining the lesson when the fire alarm rang. She was not applying makeup when her friend knocked on the door. The children were not laughing when their teacher entered the room. He was not mowing the lawn when the lawnmower stopped working. The children were not eating ice cream when the dog stole their food. We were not singing karaoke when the microphone stopped working. The team was not practicing on the field when the coach blew the whistle. The kids were not jumping on the trampoline when their dad came outside. She was not stretching before the race when she heard the announcement. The students were not solving math problems when the teacher gave a surprise quiz. Question forms. Was he jogging when it started to rain? Was she riding her bicycle when she fell? Was he exercising when his phone rang? Was I reading a book when you called me? Was he sleeping when his alarm went off? Was I eating dinner when the doorbell rang? Was I driving home when I saw an accident? Was I petting my cat when it jumped away? Was the baby sleeping when the phone rang? Was I shopping when I ran into an old friend? Was I calling my friend when my battery died? Was I walking home when I met an old friend? Was I watching a movie when my phone rang? Was I making coffee when the kettle whistled? Was he tidying his desk when his friend visited? Was he fixing the car when his wife came home? Were they eating dinner when their friend called? Were they playing soccer when it started to rain? Were they laughing when the teacher walked in? Was she taking a shower when the doorbell rang? Was I filling the form when the pen ran out of ink? Was he drinking coffee when his boss called him? Was she cooking dinner when the guests arrived? Was I ironing my clothes when the power went off? Were we driving to work when we saw an accident? Was the dog barking when we arrived at the house? Was I explaining the rules when my phone buzzed? Was I choosing a dress when my friend texted me? Was she waiting for a taxi when it suddenly arrived? Was she watering the plants when it started raining? Was I watching the sunset when my phone buzzed? Were we waiting for the bus when it started to snow? Was I talking to my friend when my dad interrupted? Were they singing a song when the lights went out? Were we fixing the broken chair when Dad walked in? Was she painting her room when she ran out of paint? Was she looking for her keys when she found a letter? Were we having lunch when the waiter brought the bill? Was she looking at photos when she found an old one? Was the baby crying when his mother picked him up? Were we arranging the chairs when the event started? Were we organizing the room when my mom came in? Were they hiking in the mountains when it started raining? Was he cleaning his room when he found a lost photo? Was she practicing the piano when the power went out? Were they listening to music when the power went out? Was he writing an email when the Wi-Fi disconnected? Were they running in the park when they saw a rainbow? Was she trying to sleep when her phone started ringing? Were they studying for the test when the lights went out? Were we laughing at a joke when the teacher walked in? Was she combing her hair when she found a gray strand? Was the baby playing with toys when his mom called him? Was the dog running in the park when it chased a squirrel? Was I texting my friend when the teacher called my name? Were we making a cake when we realized we had no eggs? Were we discussing the project when the manager came in? Was he brushing his teeth when the water stopped running? Was she knitting a sweater when her cat jumped on her lap? Was the waiter serving food when someone dropped a plate? Was she writing in her diary when her mom entered the room? Were we discussing our vacation plans when my phone rang? Was he playing video games when his mother shouted at him? Were they checking into the hotel when the fire alarm went off? Were they dancing at the party when the DJ changed the song? Was she applying makeup when her friend knocked on the door? Were the children eating ice cream when the dog stole their food? Were the children laughing when their teacher entered the room? Was he mowing the lawn when the lawnmower stopped working? Were we singing karaoke when the microphone stopped working? Was the team practicing on the field when the coach blew the whistle? Were the kids jumping on the trampoline when their dad came outside? Was she stretching before the race when she heard the announcement? Were the students solving math problems when the teacher gave a surprise quiz? Past continuous tense uses for background description in a story. Positive forms. The sky was turning pink as the sun was setting. The friends were chatting at the cafe while sipping coffee. The dog was wagging its tail while the boy was feeding it. The sun was shining as the birds were singing in the trees. The gardener was watering the plants as the sun was rising. The pianist was practicing while the conductor was listening. The sun was rising while the birds were flying across the sky. The artist was sketching a portrait while her friend was posing. The bus driver was honking as the passengers were boarding. The mechanic was fixing the car while the customer was waiting. The fisherman was waiting patiently while the water was rippling. The bride was smiling happily while the guests were applauding. The coach was giving instructions as the players were practicing. The wind was howling outside as we were sitting by the fireplace. The detective was solving the case as new clues were emerging. The train was moving slowly as passengers were waving goodbye. The dog was barking at the postman as he was delivering the mail. The farmer was feeding the cows while his son was playing nearby. The students were laughing at a joke while the teacher was smiling. The dogs were barking at the squirrel while it was climbing the tree. The scientist was looking through the microscope while taking notes. The child was laughing as she was chasing butterflies in the garden. The little boy was drawing on the wall while his mother was cooking. The soldiers were training hard while the commander was watching. The old woman was knitting a sweater as she was humming a song. The audience was waiting in silence while the curtains were opening. The orchestra was playing while the dancers were twirling gracefully. The writer was typing quickly as ideas were flowing through his mind. The librarian was organizing books while the students were studying. The birds were chirping outside as he was sipping his morning coffee. The pianist was playing beautifully as the audience listened in silence. The photographer was adjusting the lens while the model was posing. The restaurant staff was setting the tables while the chef was cooking. The artist was painting a beautiful sunset as the waves were crashing. The marathon runners were competing while the crowd was cheering. The children were playing in the park while their parents were chatting. The news reporter was broadcasting live as the event was happening. The dogs were playing in the backyard while the owner was gardening. The waves were crashing against the rocks as the lighthouse stood tall. The mother was rocking her baby to sleep as she was singing a lullaby. The city was glowing with lights as people were celebrating the festival. The baker was preparing fresh bread while the customers were waiting. The old couple was dancing together as their favorite song was playing. The swimmers were warming up as the competition was about to begin. The chef was plating the dish while the waiter was preparing to serve it. The chef was preparing a delicious meal while the guests were arriving. The students were reading quietly while the teacher was grading papers. The soldiers were marching through the town as the crowd was cheering. The little girl was skipping down the street while holding her father's hand. The kids were playing hide and seek while their grandmother was knitting. The soccer players were practicing while their coach was giving feedback. A cool breeze was blowing through the open window as she read her book. The fire was crackling in the fireplace while the family was sitting together. The photographer was capturing the moment while the bride was laughing. The actors were putting on their costumes while the audience was arriving. The tourists were taking pictures while the guide was explaining the history. The musician was tuning his guitar while the audience was waiting eagerly. The scientist was conducting an experiment while his team was observing. The market was bustling with activity as vendors were shouting their prices. The chef was tasting the soup while his assistant was chopping vegetables. The doctor was checking the patient while the nurse was noting the details. The nurse was comforting the patient as the doctor was checking his vitals. The little girl was painting a rainbow while her brother was playing with toys. The street performers were entertaining the crowd as people were clapping. The little girl was blowing bubbles as her brother was jumping in excitement. The cat was sleeping peacefully on the couch as the rain was falling outside. The kids were roasting marshmallows while their parents were telling stories. The baker was decorating the cake while the children were watching eagerly. The author was writing her new book as the candle was flickering beside her. The detective was observing the suspect while his assistant was taking notes. The actors were rehearsing their lines while the director was giving instructions. The teacher was explaining the lesson while the students were listening carefully. The waves were crashing against the boat as the sailors were adjusting the sails. The mother was combing her daughter's hair while the father was making breakfast. The pilot was announcing the landing while the passengers were fastening their seatbelts. Negative forms. The friends were not chatting while sipping coffee. The sun was not rising while the birds were not flying. The writer was not typing while ideas were not flowing. The sun was not shining, and the sky was not clearing. The sky was not turning pink as the sun was not setting. The mother was not rocking her baby as she was not singing. The child was not laughing as she was not chasing butterflies. The old couple was not dancing as their song was not playing. The dogs were not playing while the owner was not gardening. The soldiers were not marching as the crowd was not cheering. The fisherman was not waiting while the water was not rippling. The dog was not wagging its tail, the boy was not feeding it. teehee wind was not howling as we were not sitting by the fireplace. The train was not moving slowly as passengers were not waving. The orchestra was not playing while the dancers were not twirling. The students were not laughing while the teacher was not smiling. The city was not glowing with lights as people were not celebrating. The gardener was not watering the plants as the sun was not rising. The farmer was not feeding the cows while his son was not playing. The pianist was not practicing while the conductor was not listening. The detective was not solving the case as clues were not emerging. The old woman was not knitting a sweater as she was not humming. The birds were not chirping outside as he was not sipping his coffee. The author was not writing her book as the candle was not flickering. The artist was not painting a sunset as the waves were not crashing. The chef was not preparing a meal while the guests were not arriving. The teacher was not explaining while the students were not listening. The artist was not sketching a portrait while her friend was not posing. The little girl was not blowing bubbles as her brother was not jumping. The bus driver was not honking as the passengers were not boarding. The scientist was not looking through the microscope while taking notes. The soldiers were not training while the commander was not watching G. The swimmers were not warming up as the competition was not starting. The chef was not tasting the soup while his assistant was not chopping. The mechanic was not fixing the car while the customer was not waiting. The market was not bustling with activity as vendors were not shouting. The tourists were not taking pictures while the guide was explaining. The bride was not smiling happily while the guests were not applauding. The students were not reading quietly while the teacher was not grading. The pianist was not playing beautifully as the audience was not listening. The cat was not sleeping peacefully while the rain was not falling outside. The coach was not giving instructions as the players were not practicing. The street performers were not entertaining as people were not clapping. The little girl was not painting a rainbow while her brother was not playing. The dogs were not barking at the squirrel while it was not climbing the tree. The dog was not barking at the postman as he was not delivering the mail. The musician was not tuning his guitar while the audience was not waiting. A cool breeze was not blowing through the window as she was not reading. The little boy was not drawing on the wall while his mother was not cooking. The little girl was not skipping down the street while holding her father's hand. The audience was not waiting in silence while the curtains were not opening. The librarian was not organizing books while the students were not studying. The marathon runners were not competing while the crowd was not cheering. The baker was not decorating the cake while the children were not watching. The news reporter was not broadcasting while the event was not happening. The restaurant staff was not setting the tables while the chef was not cooking. The photographer was not adjusting the lens while the model was not posing. The children were not playing in the park while their parents were not chatting. The chef was not plating the dish while the waiter was not preparing to serve it. The doctor was not checking the patient while the nurse was not noting details. The baker was not preparing fresh bread while the customers were not waiting. The soccer players were not practicing while their coach was not giving feedback. The kids were not playing hide and seek while their grandmother was not knitting. The waves were not crashing against the rocks as the lighthouse was not glowing. The fire was not crackling in the fireplace while the family was not sitting together. The actors were not putting on their costumes while the audience was not arriving. The photographer was not capturing the moment while the bride was not laughing. The nurse was not comforting the patient as the doctor was not checking his vitals. The scientist was not conducting an experiment while his team was not observing. The kids were not roasting marshmallows while their parents were not telling stories. The detective was not observing the suspect while his assistant was not taking notes. The actors were not rehearsing their lines while the director was not giving instructions. The waves were not crashing against the boat as the sailors were not adjusting the sails. The pilot was not announcing the landing while passengers were not fastening seatbelts. The mother was not combing her daughter's hair while the father was not making breakfast. Questions forms. Was it raining when they left the house? Was the boy skateboarding when he fell? Were they dancing when the music stopped? Was the sun shining when you went outside? Was she drinking coffee when she spilled it? Were the candles flickering as the wind blew? Was she smiling when she opened the letter? Was the baby playing with a toy when it broke? Was the dog chasing a squirrel when it got lost? Was the artist drawing when inspiration struck? Was she dancing when she twisted her ankle? Was she cooking dinner while he watched TV? Was the bus leaving the station as you arrived? Was she tying her shoes when the race began? Was the boy crying when his mother found him? Was she wearing a red dress when you met her? Was he opening a gift when the camera flashed? Was the clock ticking as you tried to concentrate? Were they sitting in silence when the news came? Was he drawing something when you called him? Was she watching a movie when the phone rang? Was she singing softly when the baby fell asleep? Was the radio playing a song when you walked in? Was he fishing by the lake when the storm started? Were the birds singing in the trees as the sun rose? Was the bus moving when the accident happened? Was she writing in her diary as she sipped her tea? Was she sewing a dress when the power went out? Was he sneaking out when his parents caught him? Was she baking cookies when her friend came over? Was the cat sitting on the windowsill as the rain fell? Was he reading a book when she entered the room? Was the candle burning when you entered the room? Were they chasing the thief when the police arrived? Were the children running in the park when they fell? Was she whistling while she walked down the street? Was the dog barking when the stranger approached? Was he driving too fast when the police stopped him? Was the car moving slowly when the engine stopped? Was the river flowing calmly as the fisherman waited? Was the driver talking on the phone when he crashed? Was she holding the baby when the doctor walked in? Was he practicing his speech when his phone buzzed? Was he waiting at the train station when you got there? Were they laughing loudly when the teacher walked in? Were the fans cheering loudly when their team scored? Was he looking at the stars when she called his name? Were they decorating the room when the guests arrived? Was she checking her emails when the boss called her? Was she practicing the piano while her brother studied? Was the man waiting at the door when you came home? Was the chef preparing the food when the guests came? Was the old man sitting on the bench when you arrived? Was she painting the house when she fell off the ladder? Were the kids playing in the yard when the dog ran away? Was the baby sleeping peacefully when the storm began? Were they arguing about something when you walked in? Was she daydreaming when the teacher called her name? Was the clock striking midnight when the ghost appeared? Were they whispering secrets when you walked past them? Were the workers fixing the road when the truck passed by? Was she waiting for someone when you saw her at the cafe? Was the town sleeping when the thieves broke into the bank? Was the waiter serving food when the customer complained? Was the wind blowing hard while they walked on the beach? Were the guests enjoying their meal when the lights went out? Were the children building a sandcastle when the tide came in? Was the mechanic repairing the car when the customer arrived? Was she looking at her phone when she bumped into someone? Were the flowers blooming beautifully when you visited the park? Was the teacher writing on the board when the fire alarm went off? Was the horse galloping across the field when it stopped suddenly? Were the waves crashing against the rocks as they stood by the shore? Was the detective investigating the case when new evidence appeared? Were the soldiers marching through the streets when the president arrived? Past continuous tense. Use 5 repeated actions with always expressing annoyance. positive forms. He was always cutting in line. He was always repeating himself. He was always slamming the door. They were always talking over me. They were always losing their keys. He was always talking about himself. They were always spreading rumors. She was always arriving late to class. He was always drinking from my cup. He was always forgetting my birthday. She was always texting during dinner. She was always talking during movies. She was always criticizing my cooking. He was always repeating the same joke. She was always correcting my grammar. They were always asking me for money. He was always chewing loudly at dinner. He was always standing too close to me. They were always playing pranks on me. They were always arguing about politics. They were always laughing at my accent. My boss was always micromanaging me. He was always making a scene in public. He was always making sarcastic remarks. He was always teasing his younger sister. He was always showing up late to events. He was always telling exaggerated stories. He was always pretending not to hear me. She was always talking with her mouth full. My uncle was always showing up uninvited. My cat was always scratching the furniture. She was always commenting on my weight. They were always arriving late to meetings. He was always correcting my pronunciation. They were always talking loudly in the library. He was always leaving dirty dishes in the sink. She was always singing loudly in the morning. She was always texting during conversations. He was always making excuses for being lazy. She was always forgetting to turn off the stove. The birds were always waking me up at dawn. He was always humming loudly while working. They were always laughing at their own jokes. He was always making excuses for being late. He was always whistling at random moments. She was always leaving wet towels on the bed. He was always complaining about the weather. The waiter was always getting my order wrong. She was always using my expensive shampoo. My brother was always hogging the bathroom. She was always gossiping about her co-workers. He was always throwing his clothes on the bed. My friend was always showing up unexpectedly. My friends were always making last-minute plans. He was always eating my snacks without asking. The kids were always running around the house. My cousin was always interrupting family dinners. He was always interrupting me while I was talking. He was always forgetting where he parked the car. My co-worker was always making fun of my accent. He was always taking forever to reply to messages. The kids were always fighting over the TV remote. My boss was always calling me outside work hours. They were always calling me at inconvenient times. She was always leaving the lights on in every room. They were always making a mess in the living room. My friend was always taking my food without asking. She was always rolling her eyes at everything I said. My roommate was always forgetting to lock the door. My brother was always leaving his socks on the floor. My boss was always giving me impossible deadlines. The baby was always crying in the middle of the night. She was always changing her mind about everything. The dog was always barking in the middle of the night. She was always borrowing my clothes without asking. They were always laughing at inappropriate moments. My roommate was always ignoring the trash piling up. My uncle was always bringing up old family arguments. She was always making plans and then cancelling them. My neighbors were always playing loud music at night. My friend was always cancelling plans at the last minute. She was always making passive-aggressive comments. My coworker was always blaming me for their mistakes. She was always borrowing my shoes and scuffing them. My friend was always sending me long voice messages. She was always changing the TV channel without asking. My sister was always using my laptop without permission. She was always borrowing my car and returning it empty. My coworker was always stealing my lunch from the fridge. She was always leaving her makeup all over the bathroom. My coworker was always bragging about his achievements. He was always tapping his pen on the table during meetings. My brother was always taking my phone without permission. My boss was always giving me extra work at the last minute. My roommate was always using my shampoo without asking. My neighbor was always using my Wi-Fi without permission. My colleague was always complaining about their workload. She was always borrowing my umbrella and never returning it. They were always calling me for help, but never returning the favor. My friend was always borrowing my things and never returning them. Negative forms. He was not always cutting in line. They were not always talking over me. He was not always repeating himself. He was not always slamming the door. They were not always losing their keys. He was not always drinking from my cup. They were not always spreading rumors. He was not always talking about himself. She was not always texting during dinner. She was not always talking during movies. She was not always arriving late to class. He was not always forgetting my birthday. She was not always criticizing my cooking. He was not always chewing loudly at dinner. They were not always asking me for money. She was not always correcting my grammar. He was not always repeating the same joke. He was not always making a scene in public. He was not always standing too close to me. He was not always making sarcastic remarks. They were not always laughing at my accent. He was not always teasing his younger sister. They were not always arguing about politics. They were not always playing pranks on me. My boss was not always micromanaging me. He was not always showing up late to events. He was not always pretending not to hear me. They were not always arriving late to meetings. He was not always telling exaggerated stories. My uncle was not always showing up uninvited. She was not always talking with her mouth full. My cat was not always scratching the furniture. She was not always commenting on my weight. He was not always correcting my pronunciation. She was not always texting during conversations. The waiter was not always getting my order wrong. She was not always using my expensive shampoo. She was not always leaving wet towels on the bed. The birds were not always waking me up at dawn. My brother was not always hogging the bathroom. He was not always humming loudly while working. He was not always making excuses for being late. They were not always laughing at their own jokes. He was not always whistling at random moments. She was not always singing loudly in the morning. They were not always talking loudly in the library. He was not always leaving dirty dishes in the sink. He was not always making excuses for being lazy. She was not always forgetting to turn off the stove. He was not always throwing his clothes on the bed. He was not always complaining about the weather. She was not always gossiping about her co-workers. The kids were not always running around the house. He was not always eating my snacks without asking. My friend was not always showing up unexpectedly. My friends were not always making last-minute plans. My cousin was not always interrupting family dinners. The kids were not always fighting over the TV remote. My coworker was not always making fun of my accent. He was not always forgetting where he parked the car. He was not always taking forever to reply to messages. My boss was not always calling me outside work hours. My friend was not always taking my food without asking. She was not always rolling her eyes at everything I said. They were not always calling me at inconvenient times. She was not always leaving the lights on in every room. They were not always making a mess in the living room. He was not always interrupting me while I was speaking. My roommate was not always forgetting to lock the door. My brother was not always leaving his socks on the floor. My boss was not always giving me impossible deadlines. She was not always changing her mind about everything. My roommate was not always ignoring the trash piling up. The baby was not always crying in the middle of the night. She was not always borrowing my clothes without asking. They were not always laughing at inappropriate moments. My neighbors were not always playing loud music at night. The dog was not always barking in the middle of the night. My coworker was not always blaming me for their mistakes. She was not always making plans and then cancelling them. My uncle was not always bringing up old family arguments. She was not always making passive-aggressive comments. My friend was not always cancelling plans at the last minute. She was not always borrowing my shoes and scuffing them. My friend was not always sending me long voice messages. My sister was not always using my laptop without permission. She was not always changing the TV channel without asking. She was not always borrowing my car and returning it empty. She was not always leaving her makeup all over the bathroom. My coworker was not always bragging about his achievements. My coworker was not always stealing my lunch from the fridge. My neighbor was not always using my Wi-Fi without permission. My brother was not always taking my phone without permission. My boss was not always giving me extra work at the last minute. My roommate was not always using my shampoo without asking. He was not always tapping his pen on the table during meetings. My colleague was not always complaining about their workload. She was not always borrowing my umbrella and never returning it. They were not always calling me for help, but never returning the favor. My friend was not always borrowing my things and never returning them. Question sentence. Was he always cutting in line? Was he always repeating himself? Were they always talking over you? Was he always slamming the door? Were they always losing their keys? Were they always spreading rumors? Was he always talking about himself? Was she always talking during movies? Was she always texting during dinner? Was she always arriving late to class? Was he always drinking from your cup? Was he always repeating the same joke? Were they always asking you for money? Was he always forgetting your birthday? Was she always criticizing your cooking? Was he always chewing loudly at dinner? Was he always making a scene in public? Were they always arguing about politics? Was he always standing too close to you? Were they always playing pranks on you? Was he always showing up late to events? Was he always teasing his younger sister? Was he always making sarcastic remarks? Was he always telling exaggerated stories? Was he always pretending not to hear you? Was your boss always micromanaging you? Were they always laughing at your accent? Was she always correcting your grammar? Was she always talking with her mouth full? Were they always arriving late to meetings? Were they always talking loudly in the library? Was she always commenting on your weight? Was your cat always scratching the furniture? Was he always making excuses for being lazy? Was she always singing loudly in the morning? Was he always leaving dirty dishes in the sink? Was he always correcting your pronunciation? Was your uncle always showing up uninvited? Were they always laughing at their own jokes? Was he always whistling at random moments? Was he always making excuses for being late? Was he always throwing his clothes on the bed? Were the birds always waking you up at dawn? Was he always humming loudly while working? Was she always leaving wet towels on the bed? Was she always texting during conversations? Was he always complaining about the weather? Was she always gossiping about her co-workers? Were the kids always running around the house? Was she always forgetting to turn off the stove? Was she always using your expensive shampoo? Was your brother always hogging the bathroom? Was the waiter always getting your order wrong? Were the kids always fighting over the TV remote? Was your friend always showing up unexpectedly? Was he always eating your snacks without asking? Were they always calling you at inconvenient times? Was he always forgetting where he parked the car? Were your friends always making last-minute plans? Was your cousin always interrupting family dinners? Was he always taking forever to reply to messages? Were they always making a mess in the living room? Was she always leaving the lights on in every room? Was she always changing her mind about everything? Was your co-worker always making fun of your accent? Was your boss always calling you outside work hours? Was your boss always giving you impossible deadlines? Was your brother always leaving his socks on the floor? Was the dog always barking in the middle of the night? Were they always laughing at inappropriate moments? Was the baby always crying in the middle of the night? Was your roommate always forgetting to lock the door? Was she always borrowing your clothes without asking? Was your roommate always ignoring the trash piling up? Was your friend always taking your food without asking? Was she always rolling her eyes at everything you said? Was she always making plans and then canceling them? Was she always making passive-aggressive comments? Was your uncle always bringing up old family arguments? Were your neighbors always playing loud music at night? Was he always interrupting you while you were speaking? Was your coworker always blaming you for their mistakes? Was she always leaving her makeup all over the bathroom? Was she always borrowing your car and returning it empty? Was your friend always cancelling plans at the last minute? Was she always borrowing your shoes and scuffing them? Was she always changing the TV channel without asking? Past perfect tense. Explanation, uses and common mistakes. 1. What is the past perfect tense? The past perfect tense is used to describe an action that happened before another action in the past. It helps show the sequence of two past events. 2. How to form the past perfect tense. Positive sentences. Subject plus had plus past participle. Examples. I had finished my homework before dinner. She had already left when I arrived. Negative sentences. Subject plus had not hadn't plus past participle. They had not hadn't seen that movie before. He had not hadn't eaten all day. Questions. Had plus subject plus past participle. Examples. Had you finished your work before 10 p.m.? Had she met him before the party? 3. When to use the past perfect tense. A. An action that happened before another past action. Used to show that one action happened before another in the past. Examples. I had eaten dinner before they arrived. She had already left when I called her. B. An action that happened before a specific time in the past. Used when mentioning a time reference. Examples. By 8 p.m. they had finished their homework. Before 2010, she had never traveled abroad. C. To show cause and effect in the past. Used when one past action caused another past action. Examples. He was tired because he had worked all day. She failed the test because she had not studied. D. Reported speech, indirect speech. Used to report what someone said in the past. Examples. She said she had never been to Paris. He told me that they had finished the project. E. Unreal or hypothetical situations. Third conditional. Used in conditional sentences to describe something that didn't happen in the past. Examples. If I had studied, I would have passed the exam. If she had left earlier, she wouldn't have missed the flight. 4. Common mistakes and how to fix them. A. Using the simple past instead of the past perfect. When I arrived, she left. When I arrived, she had left. Fix. Use the past perfect to show which action happened first. B. Using had twice. She had had a dog before she moved. She had owned a dog before she moved. Fix, though had is grammatically correct. Using a different verb like owned makes the sentence clearer. C. Forgetting the past participle. He had go to school before me. He had gone to school before me. Fix. Use the past participle gone, seen, eaten after had. D. Using the past perfect without a second past event. She had finished her work. She had finished her work before they called her. Fix. The past perfect is usually used with another past event. 5. Common time expressions used with the past perfect. Before I had finished eating before they arrived. After she had left, we locked the door. By the time we arrived, the show had started. She had already left when we called. He had never seen snow before. They had just finished when the teacher walked in. 6. Summary table. Use. Example. Action before another past action. She had left before I arrived. Action before a specific time. By 10 p.m. they had gone home. Cause and effect. He was tired because he had worked all day. Reported speech. She said she had never been to London. Unreal past situations. Third conditional. If I had studied, I would have passed. Past perfect tense. Use 1. An action that happened before another past action. Examples. Positive forms. He had cooked dinner when I came home. She had gone to bed before I came home. We had visited the park before it rained. She had gone for a walk before it rained. She had called me before I left the house. We had already left when the rain started. He had called me before I left the office. She had studied hard before the exam began. I had painted the walls before we moved in. I had opened the package before you called. I had seen the movie before I read the book. He had taken a shower before he went to bed. I had written the email before she responded. They had visited the museum before it closed. He had cleaned the garage before we moved in. We had visited the site before it was closed. She had left the office before the rain began. They had played the game before we watched it. We had seen the movie before it won the award. He had received the email before he responded. I had heard the song before it became popular. He had studied French before he moved to Paris. I had studied for hours before I took the exam. I had heard the news before I read the article. I had finished my coffee before I left for work. He had taken his medicine before he went to bed. I had sent the invitation before they responded. She had finished her homework when I called her. I had learned the lesson before I took the test. He had stopped the car before the light changed. They had gone to the gym before the class began. I had checked the time before the train arrived. We had waited for hours before the train arrived. They had written a letter before they emailed it. She had cleaned the kitchen before we had dinner. I had spoken to the teacher before class started. I had finished my work before the meeting started. I had saved my work before the computer shut down. I had met the manager before I joined the company. We had traveled to London before we went to Paris. She had met the CEO before she joined the company. They had eaten lunch before they went to the park. She had started cooking before the guests arrived. She had asked the question before anyone else did. I had cooked dinner when they arrived at my house. They had traveled to Paris before I visited France. I had cooked dinner by the time my friends arrived. He had finished his coffee before he left the cafe. I had organized the files before the meeting began. She had learned to drive before she bought the car. They had arrived at the hotel before we checked in. We had finished our work before the others arrived. We had already eaten by the time the guests arrived. We had planned the event before we booked the venue. I had read the report before I gave my presentation. I had walked to the store before it started raining. We had cleaned the house before the guests came over. He had joined the team before the first game started. We had prepared everything before the guests arrived. They had packed their bags before the plane took off. She had finished the project before she submitted it. They had booked the tickets before the price went up. I had finished the report before the meeting started. I had shared the document before the meeting started. They had made plans before they arrived at the event. He had finished his work before the deadline arrived. I had made the decision before they asked me about it. She had prepared the report before the meeting started. She had painted the picture before the art show opened. They had completed the renovation before they moved in. They had eaten breakfast before they left for the trip. We had checked the weather before we left for the hike. They had cleaned the office before the clients arrived. They had rehearsed the play before the audience arrived. They had written the script before the director arrived. We had planned our vacation before the prices increased. She had been to that restaurant before we decided to go. He had made the presentation before the meeting started. I had called the technician before the problem got worse. I had called the restaurant before we arrived for dinner. We had arrived at the restaurant before the rush started. She had finished reading the book when the movie came out. He had visited the doctor before the health scare happened. She had answered all the questions before the time ran out. He had completed the assignment before the deadline passed. We had spoken to the manager before the issue was resolved. She had seen the report before it was shared with the team. They had completed their task before the supervisor arrived. I had read the instructions before I assembled the furniture. They had finished their homework when their parents came home. She had learned the dance moves before the performance started. We had made our reservations before the restaurant became full. They had arrived at the airport before the flight was cancelled. We had already completed the task when our boss asked about it. They had made their decision before we asked for their opinion. He had already completed the project when the boss asked for it. I had read the article before the teacher discussed it in class. He had already known about the surprise party before I told him. He had worked at the company for 5 years when he got promoted. We had already planned the event before the venue became available. Negative forms. He had not cooked dinner when I came home. She had not gone to bed before I came home. We had not visited the park before it rained. She had not gone for a walk before it rained. She had not called me before I left the house. We had not already left when the rain started. He had not called me before I left the office. She had not studied hard before the exam began. I had not painted the walls before we moved in. I had not opened the package before you called. I had not seen the movie before I read the book. He had not taken a shower before he went to bed. I had not written the email before she responded. They had not visited the museum before it closed. He had not cleaned the garage before we moved in. We had not visited the site before it was closed. She had not left the office before the rain began. They had not played the game before we watched it. We had not seen the movie before it won the award. He had not received the email before he responded. I had not heard the song before it became popular. He had not studied French before he moved to Paris. I had not studied for hours before I took the exam. I had not heard the news before I read the article. I had not finished my coffee before I left for work. He had not taken his medicine before he went to bed. I had not sent the invitation before they responded. She had not finished her homework when I called her. I had not learned the lesson before I took the test. He had not stopped the car before the light changed. They had not gone to the gym before the class began. I had not checked the time before the train arrived. We had not waited for hours before the train arrived. They had not written a letter before they emailed it. She had not cleaned the kitchen before we had dinner. I had not spoken to the teacher before class started. I had not finished my work before the meeting started. I had not saved my work before the computer shut down. I had not met the manager before I joined the company. We had not traveled to London before we went to Paris. She had not met the CEO before she joined the company. They had not eaten lunch before they went to the park. She had not started cooking before the guests arrived. She had not asked the question before anyone else did. I had not cooked dinner when they arrived at my house. They had not traveled to Paris before I visited France. I had not cooked dinner by the time my friends arrived. He had not finished his coffee before he left the cafe. I had not organized the files before the meeting began. She had not learned to drive before she bought the car. They had not arrived at the hotel before we checked in. We had not finished our work before the others arrived. We had not already eaten by the time the guests arrived. We had not planned the event before we booked the venue. I had not read the report before I gave my presentation. I had not walked to the store before it started raining. We had not cleaned the house before the guests came over. He had not joined the team before the first game started. We had not prepared everything before the guests arrived. They had not packed their bags before the plane took off. She had not finished the project before she submitted it. They had not booked the tickets before the price went up. I had not finished the report before the meeting started. I had not shared the document before the meeting started. They had not made plans before they arrived at the event. He had not finished his work before the deadline arrived. I had not made the decision before they asked me about it. She had not prepared the report before the meeting started. She had not painted the picture before the art show opened. They had not completed the renovation before they moved in. They had not eaten breakfast before they left for the trip. We had not checked the weather before we left for the hike. They had not cleaned the office before the clients arrived.